this is going to be glib and rude, but at least it's honest. I don't think it's skeptics that are actually agreeing with Jordan, or at least not people who are applying skepticism. The thing is, skepticism is essentially, as the last gentleman said, withholding your assent to an idea. It is, I am not convinced and will not be convinced until there's sufficient evidence to warrant that. That's it. It's not saying this is nonsense. I don't run around, in many cases, there's a line that Richard used that's from somebody else, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was something about your idea isn't even wrong. That it's so muddled and confused that it isn't even wrong. Essentially, it's incoherent and unfalsifiable. I don't know how big of a threat this is. What I've been trying to do, I did the event, and I know Douglas is going to do some events. Sam's done. I think Sam's got like 3 or 4 events with him. And hopefully over the course of those, we can get to some clarity about. Sometimes I'm not convinced I even remotely understand what he's advocating for, because I'll be honest, I don't care about metaphorical truths at all. I care about reality. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm fine with the idea that you can inspire people through this stuff. But I can't tell you how much of a danger it is to anything, because there are fans who've written me who say, oh, I'm a big fan of yours and I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson's. I couldn't wait for you guys to sit down and talk. And I wasn't familiar with Jordan, so I kept saying, what is it about him or his ideas that you are a fan of? And most of them didn't answer. There were a couple that answered with something that I still didn't grasp, and one of them was pretty much, I just like the way he talks about stuff, and he's really good on psychology. And I'm not here to psychoanalyze him or get in his head, but based on what he said, I don't know how much danger there is. It may be that this is a softening of religion. It may be a completely different type of reform. I just wish that I have a difficult time looking at someone who's an apologist about something that's unclear. Because if a word can mean anything to anybody, then it means nothing. And so if you say, I believe in God, and you and everybody else have a completely different, God is real, and you have different definitions of God and is and real, I don't know where you go from there.
Yeah, I agree with some of that. Look,
then you're partially right.
And I'm partially right. I think that he's done several things, and he's doing several things which are very important. I don't know if one's allowed to still quote Woody Allen, but let me just try. Some years ago, Woody Allen gave an interview in which he was asked about whether he minded not having gone to university, and he said he had, because although he'd spent his life reading, and amazingly wide reader and a wide knowledge, he said he felt that like a bridge, he had that bit and he had that bit, but what he hadn't ever got was that. And I knew exactly what he meant. Like, I don't have the arc that you can get if you've studied the whole of, I don't know, whether it's literature or law or whatever. You know how you get to there because you came from it, and you know the whole route over the bridge. My view is that a lot of young people, which is who Jordan's mainly speaking to, I think, are people who just, they don't know, like, what is this tradition or this civilization or this culture or this art or this philosophy or any of it. They've been, maybe it's worse if they've been to university these days, but everything's been deconstructed. They're told there is no core idea, no core curriculum, all this sort of thing. Everything's going to be taken in its own context. And the world is befuddling to them because it's been presented as more befuddling even than it is. And he's trying to give these people, and I think pretty successfully is, an idea of what that whole bridge might be. And the second thing I'll just say very quickly is that he is speaking to a thing which I've written about quite a lot as well, which is this sense, again, I don't want to bang on about the Europe aspect of this, but a German philosopher, Jürgen Habermas, who I quote in my book, wrote what for me was a very important essay some years ago called The Awareness of What's Missing, where he writes about a friend's funeral who is an atheist who leaves instruction that there is to be a funeral in a church. There's no amen to be said, and there are to be no priests in robes. And Habermas, in basically his most coherent work, in my view, sums this up as the fact that he says his friend has recognized the loss of faith and has also recognized that we have not yet come up with anything that remotely goes into its place. Now, lots of atheists say we don't want to fill that place. We don't want to come up with new religions or replacements for religion and so on, fine. But that there is a vacuum there, I think, has to be recognized. And my own view is that there is a deep, deep longing that people will have with or without religious answers. And that to pretend that that is not there is a very big mistake, whether you're a believer or a non-believer. And he appears to be speaking to those deeps. And I, at any rate, think that that is a great service. I have disagreements with some of the ways in which he answers that. But this, a final thought, I mean, this is, all the time, there is an interpretation of what's happened with atheism over the last couple of decades, which is that, broadly speaking, in the 2000s, people were so worried about, among other things, post 9/11 and so on and so forth, that it had a great run at running straight at the thing. Did a terrific job, Hitch and others, amazing thing. But that we are in something that is following that success at the moment, by which I mean that running at the target worked to some considerable degree. But there are a set of questions now which we have to be engaged in, which are slightly further down the road. And I think he's involved in that territory as much as or more than anyone. And I'd see no other plausible people at the moment.
I think I agree with you that he's filling a gap that some people experience. I just don't agree that there's necessarily a gap, because I'm happy with taking the good wherever I find it, including within religious doctrines, and getting rid of the bad. And so the concerns that people have about the vacuum portion, everyone that I've been presented with, I have, at least for me, and it may not apply for everybody else, I don't see a vacuum there.
Right.
I have a perfectly acceptable moral foundation absent religion. I think that, and as a matter of fact, not only do I think that the vacuum is something that religions have created, but amplified. They've done a disservice to people in how they deal with death by not acknowledging that it's an inevitable part of life. That if you realize or are convinced that this is the only life you know you're going to get, you might treat people differently the first time around rather than thinking you could make up for it. It was said once that religions poison you and then offer you the cure. And I think that it's more accurate to say, and I've said this before, that religions convince you that you're poisoned and then offer you the homeopathic remedy. And it turns out that there was no poison, that you weren't a bad fallen creature, that you that your fears about death or loneliness or whatever, these are just the facts of the universe. The universe doesn't care about us, so we have to care about us. And that's where secular humanism comes in. So I agree that atheism doesn't offer anything to fill those gaps, but secular humanism does. But I also agree that there are plenty of people who aren't going to accept that, and he may be filling a gap. And on that front, I'm a little worried, not that the gap is being filled by something that is terrible or particularly dangerous, but I see some things that are cult-like, and there are people who almost view him as a messianic figure. They don't know what to do with their life, but he can tell them.
Sure, but look, that can happen to a range of people.
Sure.
I mean, I remember at the end of his life, Hitch was concerned about the fact that some people, I mean, I remember there were people like who asked Christopher to officiate at their weddings.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a nightmare. you know, and I mean, obviously, it started to worry him. It would worry anyone. I'm not bloody wedding.
I did 2 weddings. I'll never do another.
No, I mean, it's so I mean, I wouldn't blame Jordan for that. It can come towards anyone who is presenting a comprehensive, deeply thought through, even if they're slightly wrong, you think at times, but a coherent explanation of what we're doing. And I mean, I've sensed this for years, that young people in particular, it's like, what are we doing?
Well, I'm not blaming him for it.
Sure.
I'm just talking about the effect that I see.
Got time for another?
Yes.
Hi, Douglas.
Hi.
I know you talked about your rejection of labels. I do think you have some conservative views, even by U.S. standards.
Sure.
As someone who's center-left, though, I find myself largely agreeing with many of them, and even the few I don't, it makes me pause for a moment. Voices like yours, I think, are surprisingly rare, particularly on the right in media today. And I think part of it is just intellectuals and more articulate folks do not want to risk having to break through the nuance of why they're not xenophobic or racist or hold bad views, and they'd rather not volunteer that information, leaving more extreme voices to fill that gap. So you talked about bridging divides and getting out of the bubble. How do you achieve that if maybe one side has a steeper price to pay for expressing their views than another?
Good question. I broadly think that all this has been made infinitely worse by social media, which is one of the reasons why I don't engage on it. As I said to Matt before, I mean, I wouldn't go out into the street and invite people to shout names at me, and then, like, if I didn't hear properly, go over to them and ask them to do it clearer. And in the same way, I don't seek out the sort of mad burlesque of the debate, or what passes for debate on social media. But it's clearly exacerbated because people on, I think, all political sides are increasingly behaving like trolls. So, I mean, you see it all the time. I mean, take abortion. I've got pretty typical European views about abortion. Okay, but when you hear people talking about abortion as if, there was one like shout your abortion a little while ago, like at least concede this is a really important moral question which we have to think about seriously, and you might come to one decision, either or the other. We might be pro-choice like me, but don't just try to piss off people who are pro-life. I think pro-life, by the way, I don't like the saying, it's like the other side is pro-death, but anyhow. But you see this all over the place at the moment, on almost every issue. It's like, the people I Lena Dunham says this, so I'm going to say this. Donald Trump said this, so I'm going to run this way. And it's just clearing out all the mainstream. I gave the example of Russia, but I mean, you could do it on almost anything. People that seem to be forming political views, not because they've reasoned themselves into them, but because they want to piss off people they hate. And I just think we have to find a way to do better than this. And it comes back to this thing about not making claims about your opponents that are just demonstrably untrue. I mean, I have this with Sam. Like, somebody said that a conversation Sam Harris and I had was like Nazism or something. Like, you gotta be the most fucking ignorant person in the world to think that Sam Harris, the West Coast yoga-doing, meditating liberal, is a jackbooted Nazi, okay? And I make no claim about myself, but you gotta know nothing to say that. You got to have not seen anything or been anywhere or read anything, unless what you're trying to do is to clear out the decent liberal ground, okay? And that's what some people are trying to do. I see it all the time at the moment. It's like, we want to get rid of the voices who are plausible, so we'll make totally illegitimate claims about them being Nazis, fascists, white supremacists, and so on, in the hope that we'll throw enough mud at them that they're no longer in the debate. I say, again, you have no imagination of where this goes, because if you've heard people, this is another thing we've all seen all the time. When the mainstream media can run roughshod over somebody's entire life and career, and you see it happen, you become very doubting about the next times you see it happen with people who you don't know about. And one of my things about this is that if you've heard 99 people illegitimately described as Nazis, it's highly likely that you won't believe the 100th time somebody calls somebody a Nazi, and it's possible the 100th time it's a proper Nazi. I saw this once in London. I won't go on. I saw this once in London at a debate where a really stupid person I knew was sitting beside me in a debate, and somebody stood up and asked a question. And another friend of mine, who was a Labour MP at the time, said, "It's the Nazi lady." Okay. It was somebody who I won't name, but a friend of David Irving's, this person he pointed to. I read a piece by this really stupid person in the Telegraph 2 days later saying, "It's appalling. Everyone's calling each other Nazis these days when they disagree." No, she is a Nazi. She actually is a Nazi. But it was like she'd heard it so many times that she didn't believe it when somebody said, "Oh no, that's the well-known Nazi." And that's sort of where we are. And it worries the hell out of me. I mean, the continent I'm from, we've got some Nazis around, okay? They're like, a Golden Dawn in Greece is about as thuggish a fascist street movement as you can get in 21st century Europe. If you claim that there's basically no difference between Golden Dawn and Sam Harris,
I think the only thing I'll I'm tempted to add nothing, but there's one thing that ties to your question, and no offense to Douglas, but I heard him do it, we all do it. But I keep cautioning people against it anyway, even though I'm prone to it, so it's worth getting out there. Argue honestly and stop pretending that you can read people's minds.
yes.
When I'm as pro-choice as you are going to find, I've debated it, I will call the other side anti-choice, and I will demolish their views that I think are actually harmful. But my wife and some of her friends had previously said, the anti-choice people, they just want to control women's bodies, they just want to control sex, they just want to punish women for having a vagina, a uterus, sorry. Boy, I can't believe I got that wrong.
It's not my area,
yeah. So cheers. And I said, don't do that. What you should do is say exactly what the truth is, which these individuals want to implement policies that would have the effect of controlling sex and making women slaves to their biology, et cetera. That doesn't have to be their motivation. Their motivation could be, we want to make sure that every living thing lives forever. And if you misrepresent what their actual motivation is, they get to dismiss you immediately. In the same way that when Jordan Peterson or somebody tells me that I don't actually not believe a God exists, I get to dismiss them because I know me enough to know that they're wrong about that. And so if you stop pretending you can read people's minds and stop pretending you know what their motivations are and instead talk about what they're actually doing and the consequences of those actions, I think you will get a lot farther.
There's a lady there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Sarah. I'd just like to say I'm Jewish. I do believe in God, but I don't think that God it discriminates against atheists because he made you guys for a reason. Then number two, I would like to address the, you bring up the Blitz. Circuitously or, obliquely. I would like to ask, first of all, as an atheist who speaks on religion regularly, weekly, do you find that that's a substitute for ministry? Your family is very strong in ministry. And number two, if you did not have your ministry, what would you have a passion for that kept you going? And what would you do as a vocation?
Is this for me? Because
I think so. You
This is
first.
for you and for you.
I was going to say, I didn't bring up the Blitz at all.
For you, I know that your father was a Presbyterian minister, yes?
Not a minister, no.
He was, but you were.
He was a congregant. But,
Okay, I didn't know it.
Sure.
There was your Wikipedia is incorrect.
Yeah.
Not for the first time.
Yes.
The short version is I'd have a passion for all the same things that I have a passion for. As far as I can tell, I mean, obviously I can't rewind the clock and remove my religious upbringing and everything else. I'd probably have a passion for much the same things I do, for learning and educating and magic and my hobbies. But the values that I have, the interesting thing for me was when I found my way out of the religious beliefs, I had to take an inventory of my entire life and why I believed what I believed. Hey, if previously killing people was wrong because God said so, well, does that mean I can kill people? It turns out, really easy answer, no. And there are good reasons. I'd rather not die, you'd rather not die. It's probably in our best interest to make sure we discourage that sort of thing. So you can have completely pragmatic, even selfish reasons to reach those conclusions. So what about psychopaths? Well, I mean, you don't get to point to the exception. They're not going to have a reason whether there's a God or not. The better question is, why did God make psychopaths? But I would...
That's a question for psychology, whether he did or not.
Well, so anyway, I would have a passion for much of the same things. My passion isn't let me destroy religion across the world. It is to... And because I'm not saying there is no God and religions are wrong, I'm saying I'm not convinced there is a God, and every time throughout history somebody's tried to argue for one, it's been logically fallacious and without evidential support.
So personal faith without judgment is not support?
I'm sorry?
Personal faith without judgment of others is not support?
Personal faith without judgment of...
The person who just asked the question about religion dying out, it reminds me an awful lot of Oprah's idea about, a bunch of old white people have to die out before the racism is gone. It's a bit of a eugenic solution.
No, it's not eugenics. I'm just saying that we're going to have to wait. I'm saying it's going to take time, that there are some people who... But
what if it never dies because people like me teach our children?
Well, it may never die. Matter of fact, I don't think that it will die. I think it'll just be diminished to the point where it's no more relevant than flat earthers. But
I mean, maybe I could just chip in to say that I don't spend all my time arguing about religion or telling people to drop their faith or anything like that.
True.
But, I mean, you asked what else one would do, and I, at any rate, feel rather resentful about this. Not towards you, but I feel rather resentful about the amount of time I have to spend on this. Having been brought up in the Christian tradition, and I mean, I don't hate it, I don't loathe it, far from it. But I resent the fact that having, broadly speaking, managed to see the church's role in society reduced to the position which I think it should be in, I feel resentful that now in the 21st century I have to spend so much time reading hadith and so on. And I think of all the things I would do, and it answers your question. What I would be doing is doing what I did from the beginning, before this all diverted me, which would be concentrating on my first love, which was literature and art, and writing about that. And the only reason I don't get so much time to do that is because I don't think that the conditions for that to continue to be done are satisfactorily safe at the moment.
So you believe
But the moment
that Hashem and Allah are the same thing?
I believe in what?
Do you believe that Hashem and Allah are the same God? Because you just talked about hadith and not about, say, Talmud.
Well, no, because, I mean, I can assure you, madam, that if people were chopping off people's heads in my country and citing the Talmud, I'd be reading a lot more of the Talmud and of Jewish law, and I'd be engaging myself far more in that. It's just that, in the last year, it's been multiple times that people have, for instance, walked across London Bridge slashing at women's throats, shouting, "This is for Allah." So I find myself unable to spend as much time on poetry as I'd like.